I'm going to go ahead and start recording, and we have started here, and I'm just going to shift this over to the other camera. So this is an example of one of the paper pumpkin boxes, and this is how they come. They're all flat. They have a side that is shiny. They have a side that is dull. And I put them together with the shiny side on the outside. I'll be honest with you, I have not tried to put them together the other way, but I think it would probably work because it's pretty much the same measurement all the way around. But this is what they end up looking like. And if you put it next to a real paper pumpkin box, here's a real paper pumpkin box. Here's a little paper pumpkin box. And they're definitely meant to mimic the big ones. And if I open this up, you will see that it is the perfect size for a note card. But again, you don't need the box. You can package these in many, many, many different ways. And honestly, you're going to see from the technique that we're going to be doing, you can do this technique on a regular size card. You don't need to do it on a note card. It's really not the point. It's just something that I've sized to go onto a note card, but it could just as easily be done on a regular A2 card. So my plan for what I'm going to be doing is when I am done, I will have at least 3 little note cards with their envelopes that I'm going to put into this box. And then as far as decorating the box, we'll talk about that, but there are many, many alternative ways to do that. And this is going to be a gift that I'm going to give to folks. I might even tuck in some postage stamps so that everything is included and they will just be able to write their little notes and send them off. And what I really wanted to do on these little cards was use some fun designer series paper. And I wanted also to figure out how to, some of you are going to roll your eyes, but I don't like to waste paper. I wanted to figure out how I could cut a piece of 12 by 12 paper and get the most out of one sheet to make the most little cards like this. So for me, you start off with a 12 by 12. I can get 12 sheets to use for cards out of one sheet of designer series paper. And that means that the pieces that I cut are 3 inches by 4 inches. You can cut them however you want, but it worked really well for me. So this piece here was 1, and it started as this. It started as a 3 by 4. What I also have in here are a couple pieces of scrap, and I'll be cutting those. So I picked a color that went with my designer series paper. I don't know if you can see it necessarily. It's almost a little lattice that's behind those strips. And this is where that background is what I use to anchor the pieces. And you'll see that in a minute. And they are cut to 3 1/4 wide. We'll talk about that in a second.
Oh, okay.
And then I chose another color. And in this case, I chose this red. And I made sure that when I looked at the colors that are in that designer series paper, this is Poppy Parade, the red, which is the red that is shown in here. And then the Granny Apple Green is the green that is in the designer series paper. But we all know that colors can be very close or close enough that you don't have to get super persnickety. And I use that second, that Poppy Parade, as the outline in the back. So I am going to cut my paper, and we can all do this together. And I'm going to pretty much mimic this card because I want to show you how I did it. And then you can, sky's the limit on this one. So the real background piece that I used as kind of the foundation on the card that is almost the full size of the card. You know that I like a border. And for a note card, the width here is 3.5. The height is 5. I wanted to have an 1/8 of an inch border all the way around, which means I needed to cut 1/4 of an inch lower. So 5, this becomes 4 3/4. My card is 3.5, so the Poppy Parade is 3 1/4. So it's 1/4 of an inch less on the width, so 3 1/4, 1/4 of an inch less on the height, so it's 4 1/4. So I am going to take this piece and I am just going to cut it down. And right now that's at 4 1/4. So this is part of what I was using when I made the original. So that's going to be my height, 4 1/4. And then I'm going to cut it to 3 1/4. And if I put that onto a note card, you will see that I just have a nice little border on all the edges. I will be really honest with you, these note cards can drive me a little bit buggy because they don't always have the score line in the middle of the card, and it can drive me a little nutty. So I really try to position it as best as I can. And you'll see now I have a border, 3 1/4 and 4 3/4. And that's going to be my background eventually. I'm not going to put that down just yet. Now, the other pieces of paper that I used on this card include, I'm going to call it a picket fence because it kind of looks like a picket fence going underneath that designer series paper. I'm not sure how easy it is to see that, but that's where that granny green cardstock comes in. And I wanted to have a cheat sheet. I wanted to try and get the full width of my designer series paper to be 3 1/4. And the way that I figured out I could do that is I wanted to cut a couple of pieces that were 3 1/4 inches wide. It really doesn't matter how high they are, how wide they are, because they're pretty hidden. But I wanted them to be at least 3 1/4 inches wide, because then I'm going to know what my boundaries are if I would like to line up each side so that it's sort of right on the edge. So I've got a scrap, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in, and I'm going to cut it to 3 1/4. And then let's see, how long is this? This is 3 inches. So on this one, I don't want a piece that's really wide up at the top. I'm going to do a little strip at the top. So I'm going to make that one, about 1/2 an inch. So this one's going to be 1/2 an inch by 3 1/4. Just going to let that one hang out. I'll do another one that's about 1/2 an inch by 3 1/4. Maybe I'll have that one toward the bottom. And then I'm going to do one that's, well, we'll make it 1 inch. And this is not science. It's just
Something's wrong here.
sort of what I wanted to do here. And you can see that if I put these pieces on the piece I'm going to have on the back, they go from side to side, and they're just going to give me an anchor for where I can put my strips of cardstock. And where those strips of cardstock have a little bit of an opening, it's kind of neat because it's going to give an illusion of a horizontal color. And then where there is no green, we can see the Poppy Parade kind of peeking through in the back. And I'm going to go ahead and just set that a little bit off to the side. So far I have my card base, the white. I've got the piece that's going to go in the back, the Poppy Parade, and I've got my foundation, my anchor pieces that I've cut out. So the next thing that I wanted to do was just to cut the piece of designer series paper into some strips. And this was random, very random. I'm starting with a piece that is 3 inches wide. And here what I did is I actually had 6 pieces. So if I've got 3 inches wide, and if I want them all to be the same width, magic of math, I'm going to cut them into 1/2 inch strips. The one thing I would suggest that when you do this is keep them in order. So you can see here, I'm putting my piece in at 1/2 inch. I'm going to cut it off, and I'm just going to put that piece on the far right, just so I know that that was the one that came off as I'm going right to left. And with a pattern, you're going to be able to piece it together like a puzzle, but it's kind of easier if you try to keep a little bit organized. If you don't worry about it. Also, don't go loopy if the pieces aren't completely straight, because at the end of the day, it's not going to matter. It will be an optical illusion when you put it all together. And I'm just going to cut that last one. And now I have 6 pieces that still are the same height and the same width. And I have them all arranged so I know what is on here, left to right, how it all kind of works together. So this is where some of the fun creativity starts. And let's look at where I ended up, and then I'm gonna go through it. Obviously, I ended up attaching all 6 pieces, and I tried to separate them evenly-ish. Again, don't get hung up about it. I purposely made them all different heights, and then I randomly chose different ways to cut off the ends. But I tried not to have, if you look at these 2 pieces as an example, you can see that part of the leaf design is right here, and the other part of the leaf is to the left, and your eye fills in the hole. You know that that went together. You know that these strawberry pieces go together. So you have some room to vertically separate that design, but your eye is still going to pull it all back together. So what I did is I grabbed, in this case, the thicker piece that I have cut out to be kind of my anchors. And you remember I have a thick one and then 2 thin ones, one on the top and one on the bottom. So I've got my pieces like this. And then I started on the left. It really doesn't matter, but I recommend that you start by using either the left piece or the right piece first. And all I did on these is I kind of figured out, okay, if I space these, about that distance apart, and I'm going to put the red piece that I'm going to be using just to make sure that I'm not spacing them too far apart. And then I'm going to take that first piece that I'm going to put on, And again, I'm just sort of visually making sure that it's all going to fit eventually. And then you just start playing. And when I attached these, I put little dots of glue on the anchor pieces, because then I can be assured that the glue is not going to be on the wrong place on the back of my designer series paper, and that it's not going to get, you know, completely out of whack. And then if I put my piece down, like that first piece down, the green pieces are, number one, either not going to stay straight or stay put, which is okay. And I can still move them around and kind of get them on. And then if I turn them over, I still have a little grace to get those edges, those lines lined up, so that I have my one side set. And again, don't get so crazy that you have to have this perfect. It really, at the end, will not matter. And then I got out a pair of scissors. I made sure by taking the second piece that I knew that I was the right way up. And I randomly said, I am going to whack off that and that. And I still have all my pieces in the order that I know eventually I want to get these on. The next one I want to do is the one on the right, because I want to make sure that I can get that all the way scooched over to the edge. And I'm going to do this one so that it's at a little different height. And I'm just checking visually that everything's still going to fit in when I do that. There is no right, there is no wrong way to do this. And what's really neat about it is you're going to come up with a completely different design every time you do this. And the more random you can be, the more fun it might be. And I'm just going to let that sit there for 2 seconds and sort of get a little bit set, and then turn it over. And then I still have the ability on these anchor sides to get things lined up before the glue sets. And I'm just going to give that a little bit of a push. And then on this one, I'm going to do something completely different. Maybe I'll come in from this angle, whack it off. Maybe I'll leave that one straight on the top. And now what I have left, and I can just bring them in and take a look, is I have 4 more strips. And obviously these are not yet glued down. They're still floating. And I can sort of figure out where I want the design to go. How do I want things to visually look? And just keep the card base over on one side so you can make sure you're not going above or below the lines. So you're not going to cause an issue when you're completely done. And you can start sort of laying out how you want your design to go. And there's no right or wrong here. It is completely up to you. That's kind of fun. So maybe I'll do something like that. And then what I did is I just take off one of these one at a time. Put a little glue down. And the first one You just make sure you have it the right way up before you commit it. So just put it where, where you would like it. And then what I'm doing is I'm visually looking at where that picket fence is in the back and trying to get the same spacing on all of my background. And now I can pull the other 3 out because I know what the spacing is that I want to use. And I'm also going to chop these off as I go. It's easier to do these as you go versus later trying to come back in when you have multiple pieces stuck down. You might not be able to get your scissors in where you want that to be. And I'm just going to put some more glue. And every time I do this, I'm making sure that I know that my pattern is right. You definitely don't want to commit to putting this down until you're sure that your puzzle piece is the right way up. Now, the other thing that you could do if you wanted to, an alternative, you don't have to use designer series paper on this. You could use scraps of paper. And if you wanted to, you can butt them all up against each other and not have a gap and just have your angles really be flush one to the other. So I'm just trying to make my angles a little different, my heights a little different, just to give it a little bit of interest. And I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more glue. Maybe kind of scooch that over a little bit. Take my next strip. Let's see. I've got my template here, so I know when I'm not going out of the bounds. I'm going to pull that up. Just get that kind of settled. And I'm going to bring the last one in before I commit to anything, just to see if the spacing's okay. And it's okay. It's not going to be perfect, and that's all right. Perfection is not what we're going for here. All right, so that one's okay. And what do I want to do here? I'm going to do a really big angle on that one. And then my last one. Just fill in the blank here. And okay. And what do I want here? Maybe chop that one off a little bit. So I'm really trying to give my eyes the visual of this all going together, that it's still a continuous pattern. And what I should see is that when I'm done, the boundaries of the left and the right are the measurement of that piece that I have, which means that it should fit without a problem. And it may go over a little bit, and that's fine. It's perfectly fine. Again, perfection is not what we're going for. So you can see that these are very different. They're at different heights. They're not exactly the same thing. And I'm making this super, super simple. I am literally, when I'm done with this piece, I am going to glue this and put it right on top of that background piece. And I'm just going to put a little bit of dots here and there on the ends of those designer series paper pieces so that they will stick, that they're not going to move around. And it should be pretty anchored when I do that. And you can make this card portrait. Maybe I'll do this one as a landscape. And then what I tried to do was look at the highest point here, the highest point down at the bottom, and sort of kind of maybe get them about centered. And again, it's not rocket science. It's nothing that if it's a little bit off, that anyone will really notice, because there's so many angles and so many pieces that are being looked at that you won't see it. So I could put this onto my card as a portrait, or I can switch it over and do it as landscape. It's really however I want to do it. And then all I did on here was I took a piece of the green cardstock, a bit longer than that. This one is 3 1/4. And I used one of the stamps that come in the Berry Blessings, which just corresponds with the designer series paper, and use some of the Pacific Point ink. And I'll go ahead and stamp that. With my little Stamparatus. Just going to turn that the other way. And I purposely measured my paper so that after I have stamped the greeting, that it will fit. Scooch that over a little to the left, but it will fit onto my design left to right. Yeah, I like that better. But some of the other ways, and we can talk about this, that you can put strips of paper together. You could, if you've got a designer series piece, we all know that it has, designer series paper has 2 patterns, one on one side, one on the other. And I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. What you could do is you could actually cut the strips, and I'll do it. And rather than have the same design on all your strips going left to right, you could alternate the strips and show 2 patterns that would be working together. And I'm going to try that just because I want to see what that would look like, because I think it would be kind of fun. And I just trimmed that piece so that maybe my my top and bottom, in terms of what's above and below the sentiment, would look about even. And then I'm just going to find a place on the card front where I think that looks okay. And I want to, for me, I want to make sure that I can see that picket fencing in the back. So I may center this one a little bit. I'm also going to pay attention to what I like to see in the background. And I really like that strawberry. So maybe I'll move it even further down and put it more toward the bottom on this one. Now, if you wanted to, you could grab ribbon. You could put a whole bunch of different kinds of cute little embellishments on this card and really bling it up. I'm not going to do that for the ones that I'm going to make simply because I want the paper to really stand on its own. And then all I did, I mean, this is a really very basic, only few layer card. And I just went ahead and put that right on the top of my note card. Got it as centered as I could and didn't say bad things about myself if it wasn't perfect. And then the last thing that I did, it's a little hard to see on this card, but there is some bling. I put 3 of the opal rounds. I thought these were kind of cool. They reminded me of dewdrops on fruit. And I thought they looked kind of nice as just a little accent. They've got a little bit of a glimmer in them. And I just found a couple places where I thought they would look kind of cool and used, for me, the number of 3. I just stuck those on. So these would be 2 cards that I would stick into a little box as some fun note cards for somebody to send. And with that height of not too much on the top, you can very, very easily fit 3, probably 4 at least cards in these containers with their envelopes. Now, let's talk about envelopes, because I know you ladies more than I do some decorating on envelopes. And there are some very fun ways to decorate an envelope. And one way that you can decorate an envelope that would go along with your cards is you can put some designer series paper on the flap.
Oh, yeah.
And if we measure what that flap is, it is going to be about 4 1/4 by about 2. So if I were to cut a piece of paper, I'm going to cut it to be 2 inches, and this is going to be 12 inches long. So I can actually cut it so I'll get 2, which is what I need since I have 2 cards here. I'm just going to cut it 2 inches wide. So 2 inches, I'll cut the whole thing. And I'm just going to cut it at about 5 1/2. And I'm not worried that I'm not getting this perfect because I'm going to end up cutting it in 5 1/2. So I've got 2 pieces of the corresponding designer series paper. I'm going to bring one of the envelopes back in. And what's cool is maybe I want to use this on my flap. So if I do that, I'm going to go ahead and glue this piece down onto the flap. And when I do that, I'm going to put glue onto the flap because I know where the area is that I'm trying to add my paper to. And the place that I'm really concerned about is the edge. And then I'm going to line it up against that score line and just put that down. And let that dry just a little bit. Turn it over. Give it a nice little push, nice little burnish. And then using my scissors, I am going to trim right around the edge of that flap. And what I will be left with is a really pretty corresponding design on the flap of my envelope. And this is a really easy way to add just a little bit of interest. And yes, you do use some designer series paper, but you can get 2 of these from 1 strip. And here you've got a really cute little envelope that will go with that card.
Cute.
And how cute would that be in a box? And you could also very easily switch this out so that maybe you want your flap to be exactly the same as the paper. Either way, obviously that works. But that's just a really nice way to dress the envelope up, something kind of different. And if you make sure that you put the glue on the edges of that flap, it will hold good, it will hold for you. So let me show you what it was that I was talking about with the other thought. And I'm just going to start with a piece of designer series paper, obviously the exact same pattern that we were working on. I'm going to do this one a little differently. So if I come in here, and again, maybe I want 6 strips. So if I have 3 inches and I have 6 strips, let's think about this. I could do 3/4 of an inch 3 times and 1/4 of an inch 3 times, because that's going to give me 3 inches in total. I haven't done this, so this is an experiment. I'm going to do 3/4 of an inch. Pull that one out. This one I'm going to do 1/4 of an inch. So in total, I just cut out 1 inch. Do the same thing again. I'm going to do 3/4 of an inch. And 1/4 of an inch. And then I should be left with 1 inch, which is what I have. So I'm going to do 3/4 of an inch, and then I will be left with 1/4 of an inch. All right. So here's what that did for me. I've got some skinny and some thick. And I'm just lining them up. So I have everything in the order that I need it to be. Well, what if this time, rather than putting the pieces together or laying them out so that they're all showing the same designer series paper pattern, what if on the skinny ones, I turn it over onto the other pattern? That's kind of interesting. And I can still see visually, my brain fills in that that blueberry goes together and these little berries go together. And I know that when I started this whole thing, this was 3 inches wide. So this time, what if I make my background piece that I want to attach everything out of a piece of white paper that I won't see when I'm done. I know this is 3 inches wide and 4 inches long, so I'm going to cut my white paper to be 3 inches wide and 4 inches long. And on this one, I am just going to glue them onto that paper side by side and try and get them as close together as I can. And I just need to try to keep the pieces in the right orientation when I do this. So I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on here. And you could also take a piece of sticky sheet and cut it to whatever size you want, especially if you're going to be putting something like this down all over. That way you kind of fill everything in and then you're all done. So I've just added that to the left, sort of checking to make sure that it's as flush up against that corner as I can get it. Then I'm going to do the next one. And again, this time I'm putting them right up against each other. So I'm going to push that left piece as close as I can and lay that down. And I'm going to cheat and just see, it's looking pretty good. Grab my next piece. And do that one. These skinny pieces are a little hard to hold on their side. Get the next one. Put that right up against. And it's almost this sort of visual that there's a little curtain sort of in front of the berries, which is fun. It's almost an optical illusion too, that they're two different depths, which is just a little bit interesting. Put these up against here. And then the last one, again, I'm double checking. Yep, that's the right way. Okay. I'm going to put that on. All right. So I have my 6 pieces on here. And I can see that there's a little itty bitty bit of white that's showing over here on the right. Well, I'm just going to trim that off just because I don't want it to show. Try to make it look as perfect as I can. And then if I make a piece of the Poppy Parade for the background, and again, we knew that that Poppy Parade is 3 1/4 by 4 3/4. So if I cut that piece, so let's see, we'll do 3 1/4. And 4 3/4. And then that would be the background for that note card. And I'm just going to pop it on the back of this one right here. And for this card, you know, just a thought, I might bring that a little bit more high. Maybe I could put my sentiment down here on the Poppy Parade, put a ribbon or something on the top and tie it around. But here's another way to do that. And I want to just leave you with one other, and then I promise that I'm going to be quiet. And I'm really going to talk this one through rather than do it. If you can imagine that these pieces are not designer series paper, but they're just card stock strips, scrap that you have. And they're maybe the same width, maybe not, and they're all together, but they're askew so that some are pointed and some are not. One of the things that I saw was a really cool idea is once you get that all together, if you take a little die or a little punch, like a heart, and you punch out on one color cardstock, let's pretend this is blue, and you punch it out, you might have a little blue heart. You could take that little blue heart and put it as an embellishment somewhere else on the card. You could do some other hearts on other parts of the card and use those as embellishments as well. So it's also a great way to use up scraps. But that's really the idea, to take some designer series paper, to pick a design, cut out some strips, either different widths or the same width, and arrange them so that you can have a very interesting flow of the design, different angles on the ends, but your eye still pulls everything together. Or maybe you have different patterns that you use. It's almost like a funky wallpaper where it still all pulls together, but you can really get creative in how you make the design work. And then maybe put a little bit of interest on the envelopes that you would be putting together, and eventually put them into a nice little box or packaging, whatever the packaging is that you would want, and get this together for a friend, a family member, tuck in some stamps. And then as far as designing or decorating your box, you could make some fun designs on the outside. I could put a little bit of the poppy behind here. I would suggest that if you're putting cardstock onto these boxes, to use some tear and tape to really get it to stay down. But I could put some paper on the top of this box. I could put another layer. In fact, this is probably what I'll use this for, is a layer on here. And then maybe tie it up with a ribbon and find a stamp that says "for you" or "thinking about you," and then just package it up and have it so that that person could then open the box and look at the gift that's inside.
Perfect.
So
Super cute.